Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here today on this perfect sunny Adirondack day here at the Wild Center. We are really fortunate to be bringing another part to our Science Speaker Series, which is a 5-part series this summer. So we're halfway through. I can't believe it. Summer is fast dwindling, but we still have many days left to enjoy, and today is one of them. Today we're very grateful to have Bridget Lyons here, who flew all the way from California to come, I will say selfishly, to spend some time with me and be here at the Wild Center. And we're going to be learning a lot from her about her travels around the world and deep observations of the creatures and the animals, plants, everything that makes up this landscape around us. She has just released a brand new book, which we are so proud to be one of the first sites to be able to host a talk about and to be able to sell on our shelves, which I highly encourage you all to go grab a copy of this afterwards in our store. It is called Entwined, Dispatches from the Intersection of Species. It is a collection of 14 essays throughout which you're traveling from Alaska to Honduras. You're meeting critters like octopus, as well as you're meeting your average human, great horned owl, and plants along the way. It takes a really beautiful tone and narrative to not only storytelling, but also deep observation, which is, I think, what you're really trying to highlight, is becoming more aware of the deep interconnections of things that are happening in front of our eyes every single day. It is a wonderful read. I had lofty dreams of getting it all finished before I came to talk to you all today. I got partway through. It's amazing. I look forward to spending some time on my porch while my kiddos are away to read the rest of it. Bridget comes to us with a really fun and eclectic background. She's not only a writer, an editor, an artist, and an explorer, but she has been an environmental educator, a 5th grade teacher. She has been a yoga instructor. She has sold and made protein energy bars. She's been a caterer. She's pulled weeds at mansions. She has done a number of careers to pursue her creative outlet, which is traveling the world, learning about the organisms around her, writing, and creating amazing art, which you're going to see some of that featured today throughout her talk. So, aside from those very notable contributions to her work, the art and the beautiful writing that she does, she has a undergraduate degree from Harvard and an MFA in creative writing from Northern Arizona University. So she definitely can out-grammar check me with the best of them. But I think the thing that she has noted being very proud of is learning guitar over the past few years, and can pick her way through a few very notable songs like Blackbird. Without further ado, I really would love to bring up Bridget to introduce more of her story. Before I do that, I have a survey for all of you that I will put up at the end of the talk, but I just want to forewarn you that I am going to ask you to fill out this survey, and please do. It is extremely short, and it helps me to book the types of talks, speakers that you want to hear, and the content that you're really excited about. So please take the time to fill out this very short survey at some point throughout. I'll make sure to pop this up before the end of our presentation today. But now officially, without further ado, put your hands together for a loving Tupper Lake welcome to Bridget.
Thank you, Leanne. I feel like she just did all the work and I don't need to do anything anymore. Now that I've been introduced, I think I'll just go. No, I'm so pleased to see you all here. Thank you to Leanne and the Wild Center for bringing me here, and thanks to all of you for coming. Before we get started, something we do in Santa Cruz, California, where I've lived for the last 6 years, at most public gatherings, is a land acknowledgement to honor the people who stewarded the land before European settlement. And I'd like to bring that tradition into the room today and take a moment to recognize the people of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy who maintained a close relationship with this, their ancestral land, and with the creatures who inhabited it as well. Leanne talked a little bit about the book, that it's a collection of 14 essays, each profiling a different creature that I have had interactions with in the wild. So no domestic animals, all critters out there living on their own in the world. And braided into these encounters are stories from my life, as well as some science tidbits and some ethical and policy considerations. And there's also 9 linoleum block prints included that I made somewhere along the way. My objective in putting together this book was to celebrate the creatures that make my life rich and to hopefully inspire other people to wonder. This, I think, is really foundational to seeing the world as an entwined place. And I think that seeing the world as an entwined place is really the key to a shift in thinking. And I think that shift in thinking is absolutely necessary for us to face some of the challenges we've got, which are quite large as a species right now on this planet. And I was super pleased coming here today and taking a tour of the exhibits to see a number of exhibits here at the Wild Center that are really focused on this idea of entwinement. There's, in fact, you've probably all seen the braided strands of water. The blue strands represent water and the orange strands represent creatures, and that if you pull on one of those threads in that little tapestry, everything shifts and changes because everything is related. And that's very much what I'm getting at in this book, is trying to help people experience that. And my way of doing that is through personal stories combined with science, combined with ethical policy considerations, so that in essence, all those things are entwined or braided as well. I suspect that all of you are at least intrigued by that idea, and that's why you're here. So I welcome you and hope you get a little bit more out of that through either this presentation or through checking out the book. I'm going to start by reading a little chunk of one of the essays in the book, which is called Octopus Worship. In this essay, I'm going to set the stage. In the essay, I'm in the Heraklion Archaeological Museum, which is a huge archaeological museum in Crete, the big island off the coast of Greece, that's dedicated mostly to the Minoan civilization, which was around a long time ago, like 2,500 years ago, and super impressive culture. I had been peering into the slick display cases, reading the bilingual interpretive signs, and dodging groups of tourists for about a half an hour when I spotted the first vessel. Vessel meaning an amphora, which is a two-handed vessel that you may have studied somewhere along the line in art history or something. From where I stood, I assumed I was just looking at a standard cream-colored jug adorned with a wavy line motif. But the wavy line had a bunch of little hollow circles running along one side of it. It looks like an octopus tentacle, I thought to myself, surprised at the resemblance. I pushed my way through the crowd to get a better view. It didn't just look like an octopus tentacle, it was an octopus tentacle. And there were 8 of them, radiating from a body punctuated by 2 big cartoon-like eyes. The design was so stylishly curved and finely edged that in another setting I might have mistaken it for a microbrewery logo or a skateboard deck. But this graphic wasn't created with Adobe software. These undulating arms and sensuously rounded bodies were painted by a Minoan around 3,500 years ago. After I spotted the first octopus amphora, I stepped a little to my left to look through the glass from a different angle. There was another. The jar itself was shorter and squatter, but the imagery was similar. A boldly painted octopus with swirling, sucker-clad appendages and googly eyes. I walked over to the next case and found 2 more octopus representations, one of which showed the creature lying on its side. By the time I got all the way through the museum, I had found 7 in total. I thought 7 renditions of a somewhat rarely witnessed sea creature was a lot. As I stood in the spotless Minoan pre-palatial period room, I had to wonder if during that chunk of history, the octopus was having a moment. The octopus is definitely having a moment here in the Anthropocene. Following the popularity of the 2020 Netflix documentary, My Octopus Teacher, and Cy Montgomery's 2016 book that explores her encounters with captive cephalopods, The Soul of an Octopus, news about this fascinating creature's distributed neural networks and intriguing intelligence has spread far and wide. Many people know a handful of fun tidbits about octopuses these days, like the fact that they can change colors almost instantly to blend in with their surroundings, or the fact that their large, surprisingly vertebrate-like eyes operate independently and dilate on demand. A month before I flew to Crete, I'd visited Monterey, California's famous aquarium, where I'd had to elbow my way through 8 or 9 people to secure a spot in front of the giant Pacific octopus tank. When I got there, I had an intimate view of the creature's tube feet, or suckers, as many people like to call them. They were quarter-sized white discs, grouped in pairs, running the length of each arm. He pressed them 2 by 2, inch by inch, into the glass. After contact, they expanded, looking a lot like the suction cups I once used to adhere my 5th grade stained glass projects to the kitchen window. Only there were dozens of them moving in synchrony. We all watched him traverse his space by shooting one leg way out in front of his body, sticking his tube feet to the tank wall, and then, in one graceful but vigorous motion, hurling the rest of his body forward to catch up with his tentacle. "Whoa," the 10-year-old in front of me said, as a mass of protoplasm surged across the tank. "He's like a superhero." Then, as if to prove that, the octopus clasped a white rock and promptly shimmied his patchy brown skin into a pale beige pattern that made him significantly more difficult to see. Everyone gasped. What is it about the octopus that draws us in? So, I almost feel like I'm cheating a little bit because the octopus is low-hanging fruit. Like, they're cool. They're really easy to experience wonder at. Whether you're in the presence of one in the wild, which I have had the great good fortune to be, or you're in the presence of one in an aquarium, or you're just looking at a cool picture. They're amazing. There were several little factoids in there, a couple more factoids. They have barbell-shaped eyes. You can kind of see that there. That instead of having rods and cones for color perception the way our eyes do, their eyes, that barbell shape distributes the wavelengths of light differently across the back of their eye, and then they can actually change the depth of their eye to focus on a different wavelength. So they see color, but in a completely different mechanism than the one we use to see color. The other theory that I love talking about because it's fascinating is people will sometimes say that octopuses have 9 brains, one in their kind of the main mantle, but 8 more in their arms, legs, tentacles, whatever you choose to call them. And that is because each of those tentacles can sense, can actually like taste and experience and make decisions about its environment independently. So for a while we thought that the octopus arms were all completely separate brains, but then researchers found that one tentacle can communicate messages to another one. So they're not totally separate, they're sort of centralized, sort of distributed. What is life like as a sort of centralized, sort of distributed intelligence? We have no idea because we live with a very centralized intelligence that's mostly up here. So part of what this gets at is a fascinating concept called Umwelt that you may have heard if you've read Ed Yong's book, An Immense World, which is a fabulous book, highly recommend. And getting into another critter's Umwelt, their way of seeing the world, their way of sensing the world, is one of the best ways we know to appreciate and wonder at the way the world looks through their eyes, or in the case of the octopus, through their sucker feet, right, through those 8 tentacles. So octopuses are amazing, but so is everyone else. People have been asking me, how did you decide which creatures you were going to write about for this book? The reality is I could have written about any creature out there, any plant, any animal, any macroalgae, any fungus. Every living creature out there has amazingly cool evolutionary traits that have developed over the course of its lifespan, its evolution, to adapt to living in this world. Easy to see with the octopus, not as easy to see with some other creatures, but my objective is to help you see that you can find these out your back door. So we're going to take a look at a few of the other creatures that I talk about in Entwined. Owls. I'm going to keep giving you factoids because factoids are fun and factoids create wonder, I think. Owls can see in 3 dimensions and judge distances just like we can. They can also hear the heartbeat of their prey from 300 feet away. That one we don't have, although it would be really cool. Their eyes, and this is a picture of an owl named K2, who was a resident owl at the Teton Raptor Center in Wilson, Wyoming, a place where I get to hang out a bit. And this is a Eurasian eagle owl. She has since been retired, but big, huge, amazing, stately animal. And So in most owls, eyes take up 5% of their body weight. If our eyes were 5% of our body weight, they'd be the size of oranges. So I mentioned that my book has 9 linoleum block illustrations, so I've included with the pictures the illustrations from the book, which are, not on big white space like that. They're pasted into the front of the essays, but if you pick up the book, you'll be able to see them. Kelp is another amazing creature. So kelp is neither a plant nor an animal, which is why I have to resist saying my book is about plants and animals, because there's an essay about kelp. Kelp is in the category of a macroalgae, which was recently created. If you went to school back in the time where there were plants and animals and that's it, newsflash, we've created a few more kingdoms of life since then. We're reclassifying these things all the time, especially as genetics has gotten more sophisticated and enabled us to understand how different creatures are related a bit better. So kelp is what's called a macroalgae. This is giant kelp here in this picture. Giant kelp can grow as fast as 12 inches a day. And if you've ever been to the Monterey Bay, which I know some of you have because some of you live right by it, you can see that because one day there's not much in the way of kelp beds because there's a bunch of swell, and then 2 days later it's completely full. So 2 feet of growth in 2 days. Kelp can also stretch up to 40% of its length before it breaks. So amazingly flexible. And it has that beautiful pattern on it. In addition to scientific factoids, I am a big fan of just marveling at creatures because they're beautiful and they're creative in the way that they exist in the world. So don't feel intimidated if you're like, ooh, I'm not sure I'm a factoid person. I don't want to chase down a lot of science. There is a huge amount of value to be had in looking at this giant kelp pneumaticist here with its blade and saying like, wow, that's a beautiful pattern, which it is. That is a color version of the kelp piece that's in the book. Humpback whales, this is another kind of low-hanging fruit one, right? People generally appreciate whales pretty easily because they're amazing and majestic. Humpback whales live in all of our oceans. Each one has its own migratory route, and some of those migratory routes for humpback whales are up to 3,000 miles long. Humpback whales sing. You might have heard some of their song. It's beautiful. Only the males sing, however, and we're not quite sure why. Recently, there was this New York Times article about summarizing research about how different populations of males steal material from the other populations of males they encounter. They actually implanted a sequence, we'll call it a tune or a phrase if you're, say like 10 bars if you're a musician. They implanted into one group and then they watched how that phrase made its way across oceans to other humpback whale groups. So to say that other animals don't have culture doesn't really work. Like that is culture in action. And the author Carl Safina, I noticed that Alfie and Me is one of the books you have in the gift shop over here. He's a fabulous science writer. He has written a whole book about animal culture, talking about how ideas like this get passed through animal populations. That's my humpback whale print. That's in the book. Chestnuts. The American chestnut once blanketed the entire East Coast, although I think not quite up here. I think it stopped kind of short of the northern Catskills. But before 1904, 4 billion American chestnut trees blanketed the East Coast. Hardwood, fast-growing wood, rot-resistant wood, perfect for houses, perfect for furniture, perfect for a number of uses. And all of those trees succumbed to a blight from Asia, a fungus that was introduced from Asia. These days, the American Chestnut Foundation and other groups are working to genetically modify the American chestnut in order to be blight resistant and hoping to reintroduce chestnuts throughout the East Coast to bring them back to their former majesty. That's more or less what the leaves look like in graphic form. Stingrays. The stingray essay in the book is about me being stung by one while surfing in Mexico a bunch of years ago. Very painful, not a recommended experience, but an experience of connection nonetheless. And And I still have a little scar on my toe that I look at periodically. And in the essay, I talk about how that scar to me feels like something I'm proud of, not because I came out of it alive and I won, but rather because it connected me to this creature and helped me think more deeply about whether I should have been surfing in that spot where there is a notorious blanket of stingrays on the floor of the ocean. And I went anyway. And thinking about where we should and shouldn't go as our species is a worthy contemplation that I examine a little bit in that piece. Stingrays have barbs like hypodermic needles hidden inside their tails, and nestled into grooves on the underside of those barbs are these venom-filled cells. That would be what got me. And the poison in those cells contains serotonin, contains another chemical called 5-nucleotidase, and another one called phosphodiesterase. The first two cause pain, intense pain, I'll add, and the third one causes tissue death. So it's sort of a brilliant cocktail engineered to do exactly what it does, which is take down small prey and give them something to eat. So yet another amazing example of creativity in the natural world in action. That's probably what the floor of the ocean looked like that I stepped on, if not even close together. I didn't actually see it. So this is an ibex, if you've never seen one before. In 1850, there were fewer than 100 of them in the Alps, in the European Alps. And all of them were in a little section of Italy because an Italian king kept them there for his hunting purposes. And I talk about that story in the essay. But we're up to about 40,000 today, thanks to a big push to repopulate them in the European Alps. They have super strong legs that can jump up to 6 feet, and they have hooves made from a spongy material that enables their hooves to kind of round to a cliff face. If you're looking for something fun to do later, go onto YouTube and enter something like ibex going up a dam wall, like literally a dam, almost sheer vertical face and crawling up that because of these spongy hooves. And also they have 2 toes, like all goats do, and they can move them independently to create like a stable platform to step on. There's an ibex. And then last but not least, we have sea stars. Sea stars can practice this amazing skill that I wish I had called autotomy, where they can sever a limb in response to danger. So there's something called catch connective tissue in that limb, and the neurons trigger the catch connective tissue and basically say, like, trouble, out of here, boom. Limb goes off, and then they regenerate a new one, which most people know later. There are a couple species of the Lynchia genus, which is sea star species that lives in the Philippines. This is cool. That can actually regenerate the rest of the body from a limb. Wow. So most of them need at least part of the central disc to do that, but there is one species that can regenerate without the central disc. So give it a limb and you get a whole new sea star. So that you'd think you would be colonizing the Earth with that kind of a species, right? And there's the sea star art. So that's a quick introduction to some of the creatures in this book, and just a few of the 8.7 million species that we have here on Earth, any of which I could have written about because they're all super cool. The ones I chose because I had a relationship with them. I encountered them at some point in the wild, but also because they struck me in a way and triggered me to think of something about my own personal story. And I'm a big believer in creating multiple portals for people to enter information. We've got tons of science out there about climate change. It doesn't seem to be changing our behavior. We've got tons of science about the need for animals to have protective habitat. It doesn't seem to be changing our behavior. So my tack towards environmental advocacy, if you will, is to combine science with personal story and with other people's personal stories and encounters, in hopes that people who don't necessarily immediately get attracted to scientific stories, maybe they get attracted to personal stories. Oh, and they want to read about my experience. Great. And in the process, I'm going to feed them some science tidbits too. I'm going to feed them some awareness about this creature. And the idea being, with multiple entry points, perhaps I can help to create empathy between the reader and these species. Because again, I think my belief is that if you notice and you appreciate and you wonder, you connect, you create empathy. And when you do those, that person cares more and then is more likely to take that creature into account in daily decision making. Whether that's like, maybe I won't mow this section of the lawn and I'll let it be a pollinator zone and an area for insects to live in. Or maybe I won't use this pesticide or herbicide. Or maybe I won't use this single-use plastic water bottle that's probably going to end up in the great, one of the gyres in the Pacific Ocean where a lot of plastic bottles end up. And then again, I think once we make different personal decisions and we know these creatures better, it becomes harder to support things like deep sea mining or fracking or opening up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to further petroleum exploitation. The more we care about these creatures, the harder it is to condone those kind of decisions. And that said, it's hard to remember all of this. And I think the easiest way to remember is to call upon our own experiences encountering other creatures. So I just want to take a couple minutes here to open this up to you all. I am curious to hear about your experiences with other creatures of any variety, ideally not domestic because we tend to change their behavior a little bit, but any creatures in the wild that you've encountered, what did you notice about them and how did it make you feel? Leanne's got the mic and she's going to take quick stories from any intrepid sharers about any creature that has made you stop and think. We've got someone back there.
Ooh, I'm going to go to Terry first.
And this isn't unusual. My encounter with wonderful birds has been deep and meaningful. And one of the ones I most love spend a lot of time at my feeder. They come in quickly, they leave quickly, they knock off their brothers and sisters, and I love hummingbirds. But one particular afternoon, I was out on our deck in Colorado, and there was a hummingbird that stood in one place just looking at me, and it was like laser beam eyes. And I realized I haven't put the food out today. But it clearly, because they can see so well, and indeed even see you inside a house, and that happened recently also. I was by the window talking to someone on the phone, and again, another hummingbird came and just stood there looking at me, direct eye contact, and I thought, I've forgotten the food again. So it's wonderful how they really can connect for help, to help themselves and to make us aware of them and more caring about them.
Yeah, thank you. That's a terrific example. There's no denying that you have a relationship with those birds. You are connected to them. Your life is entwined with them. Theirs has become entwined with yours. And if something were to happen that would imperil those hummingbirds, I imagine that you would feel deeply about that and want to do something about it. That's a fabulous story. Thank you. Would someone else like to share?
Hi. I have loved animals since as long as I can remember, but there's one species that always had me a little fearful, which are spiders. So as a young girl, I was always afraid of spiders, and I would call my father to come move them out of my bedroom or wherever they were. But I had this really cool experience at an internship right out of college where there was a path I had to travel every day, and there was this orb weaver who had built a web across a path. So even though I was afraid of her, I gently moved her web out of the way, and every morning she would rebuild it and we'd be back. So finally, and she started moving her web up a little higher every day. So finally I realized I could just duck under her web. She wasn't trying to hurt me. I didn't need to hurt her. And we had this understanding that if she kept her web up so that I could duck under it, I could still go about my way and I wouldn't take it down. And I just had this it's hard to describe really, but this profound experience of just recognizing this individual, recognizing its place in this micro environment that I was in and the importance of it. And that sort of started my interest in learning about spiders. And you can ask my coworkers here, like I'm the one when somebody comes and is like, can anybody ID a spider? I'm like, ooh, let me try, because I just had this one really cool experience and it changed how I thought. I don't know if I changed what the spider thought, but.
Thank you. And I noticed that there was a little orb weaver spider kind of stop along the way on one of the walks over there, which I loved seeing. And I think, I like that you're telling that story, because insects tend to not fall into the low-hanging fruit category of connection, right? They're a little harder for a lot of humans to connect with, to the point that a lot of humans want to eradicate them altogether and kill them and remove them from the planet, which would be disastrous because they're the base of the food web in many places, and they serve so many other functions in addition to food functions. The Xerces Society, Xerces, I believe, is an invertebrate conservation group that is dedicated to educating people about invertebrate, specifically insect importance and to the ecosystem and appreciation. And I think we can appreciate them. We might have to try a little bit harder, but your example is a beautiful one of just a little bit of effort, and look how it repaid itself in terms of you recognizing value. So, that's okay. That's okay.
We live in the Hudson Valley in an agricultural area. We have a farm on our property, and we have a pond that we had to rehabilitate for a bunch of reasons because it was filled with acres and centuries of farm muck. But we don't have any fish in the pond. It's all frogs and millions of dragonflies. And here it looks like this perfect environment for mosquitoes. Like I feel like looks like there are no mosquitoes, because between the frogs and the dragonflies, and I only learned this from a Wild Center post on Wildwire a couple of months ago, that dragonflies eat mosquitoes. And it's the best place to hang out if you want to avoid mosquitoes, shockingly. So.
I think your example is a really good illustration of entwinement, right? That when an ecosystem is balanced, then one species doesn't get completely out of control and overinfest the area, because there are other creatures that are preying upon it, that it is preying upon. You pull on one strand, the other strands make up the difference, and you end up with a balanced ecosystem. Now, sometimes we have a way, our species, of entering into ecosystems and throwing that balance completely out of whack. All the more reason to learn about the balance, appreciate it more, and then we can take steps to preserve the balance where we can. So great story, thank you.
Anyone else have a story they'd like to add? Ooh, I'm coming around. As fast as I once was.
We had the privilege of going to Africa last year and seeing elephants. Well, we saw a lot, but my fascination was elephants. It was spring, so there were babies, and there were 2-year-olds and fathers and mothers, and it was just an amazing experience to watch the family dynamics of this group of, well, there was more than one, but groups of elephants, and watching how the bull elephant behaved and the mothers, and then watching the babies, which I was just fascinated by, imitating all of the adults and learning everything they needed to learn. So it was to see an animal that we look at in zoos as a member of a family was a very strong impact on me.
Back to that culture thing, right? That is, you saw animal culture in action. And I think it's really hard to say that those creatures don't experience emotion after you've seen that. Is there attachment between mothers and their babies? Like, you saw it on display. And I think another piece that really comes out in my book, or I really try to bring out in my book, is this idea that anthropomorphism, which is looking, wondering if animals have emotions, potentially ascribing human emotions and human characteristics to those animals. That is a quality that for many years in science was kind of stamped with verboten. We don't do that. We don't say that animals have emotions, or that non-human creatures have emotions. We don't say that they have any traits like us. So Carl Safina, who's written quite elegantly about elephants, says that anti-anthropomorphism thing is actually what's gotten us into this jam. That by saying, no, they're nothing like us. They don't have emotions like us. They don't have family. They don't have cultures. They're totally different. Maybe it gives a certain objectivity, which is helpful for science, but it also puts up a wall. And I think that when we take down that wall gently, not by saying like, oh, look, it thinks that I'm cute. We don't want to go that far, but by stopping short of that and considering that they might have cultures and emotions like we do, then we can take down that wall and rebuild connection. And I think your example speaks really well to that. So thank you.
I had an interesting, delightful experience with a family of crows. I love crows. I knew they were nesting in the next right by where my porch is. And one day I heard, I could see the branchers up there hopping along. And one day I heard this great clattering. Well, the branches had all come down to the ground. And one of them, their job is to get up off the ground before the sun sets. There was a tree that had fallen and was leaning against another tree. So this one just, climbed up that thing and was standing there on that. And I walked over to it and I got fairly close and, just greeted it gently. And then Mama came by. And oh my word, was I the bad guy. I was chased over to the edge of the porch, onto the porch, into the building. I couldn't even be on my porch. That mother was not letting me out, and crows have such a memory for faces that the whole summer, that mother would just holler at me when I went outside. I tended to ignore her a great deal, but that was really fun.
It sounds fun. Again, you have a relationship, just like the hummingbirds. You have a relationship with the crows, and there's no question that there's some kind of recognition happening there. And I love too that crows are another species that gets maligned. Right? There's too many of them. There's a lot of them because they're very smart and they're very adaptable and they can deal with changing conditions incredibly well. And that's what it's going to take to survive climate change is creatures that can problem solve on the level that corvids, crows, jays, etc. can. And so I like that you're appreciating their intelligence and playing with it in your relationship with them. Thank you.
I have a place with a small pond in the wilderness about 8 miles from here. And I go swimming and drifting around on an inner tube every afternoon. There is also a solitary loon who spends much of his time on the pond. And I say his, I don't know, but I kind of assume it's a male. He has tended to come around when I'm drifting across the pond, not get real close, but maybe drift parallel to me, maybe 50 feet away, and I feel a real bond. It's almost every afternoon that I go out on the inner tube. He's out there just hanging out with me.
Lucky you. Lucky you. I just want to pause for a moment and talk about that his thing right there. And same thing we had her with the spider back there. I really appreciate that. While we have the gendered issue of we don't always know if they're a he or a she, and there are plenty of creatures that are hermaphrodites and have various kind of intersex statuses or change throughout their lives. So perhaps we should be using they or a new pronoun that we could invent. But I'm a big fan of of avoiding its. Because when we it something, I want to say dehumanize because there's that word, right? We're taking the life out of the, like, it is what I refer to, an inanimate object as. And, in many Native American languages, there isn't an it term for an animal because animals are brothers and sisters and they're given pronouns or terms that are the same as the ones that are given to people. And I'm in the book, you might notice that every time I had the opportunities to say an animal that or an animal which, I say who. So while I do use it at times because the gender thing would have gotten confusing with pronouns, I do make a point of always using who. And when I walk into the woods or I'm at a pond, the question I ask is like, who's here today? You know, or I look up in a tree and say, who are you? And just that shift in language, I think, can be a really powerful shift in mentality that helps us to think about the creatures we share the planet with as other beings, other who's, and not other it's. So, with that in mind, I just want to end with, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
I was also on this trip to Africa, and I had a little different experience. We were out one late afternoon around dusk, and we'd seen a lot of animals, and we came around a bend, and there was a whole pride of lions lying in the road like big pussycats. And we were sitting up on the truck, and we turned the engine off, and the guide said, "All right, everybody, stay still, don't do anything crazy." But somehow I ended up in a staring contest with this lion. And we locked eyes. It was probably for about 30 seconds. It seemed like about 30 hours. But all of a sudden, I don't know whether he got up to stretch or he was just going to move on. But as soon as he moved, and I was staring at him like this, and all of a sudden I just went, and I thought,
you lost.
I lost that one. And there's a reason they say he's king of the jungle. The size of these animals and the mane on them. And it just kind of showed you who's boss out there. Humans are a very small part of what's out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I like how that you had a clear emotional, visceral experience to this other creature and your relationship to it, which was one of inferiority for the moment, at least anyway. Yeah. And I think many humans before, say, the 1800s, more frequently had experiences of being intimidated by creatures in the wild: wolves, bears, absolutely lions, tigers, etc. And we don't have that as much anymore because we've pushed a lot of these carnivores to marginal places in the world. And so, but I think it's always a good reawakening to have that, whether you go camping in bear territory or you go on a safari. It's like, oh, right, there used to be even more really large predators wandering the planet before we did away with them. So I'm glad that you had that experience. Thank you all for sharing those stories. I just want to wrap up by reading a little excerpt from the last essay in the book, which is called Pink Healing. And it's about fireweed, which is a species that exists all over alpine regions, and I believe here as well. And I haven't encountered it here yet, but I've encountered it in a bunch of other places. And fireweed's superpower, if you will, let's look at some, is that it comes in after a fire and literally heals the land by producing, per plant, 80,000 seeds. And if you've ever seen it, it looks like tiny little cottony threads. So when it's seeding, it's, there's white stuff all over the place. And it turns, so after a fire, often the soil becomes mineral as opposed to organic. And so it's not very hospitable to many other plants. But fireweed comes in and it can handle this mineral soil. With its 80,000 seeds per stem, it can completely colonize an area, as you can see it has here at this is a spot in the Tetons in Wyoming. And in doing so, it changes the soil back to an organic soil. And after a handful of years, it can't live there anymore, right? Because it's changed the biochemistry of the soil in such a way that it's now hospitable to aspens and alders and all these other succession species, but it can't live there. It moves on to a different place where it can heal somewhere else. So this section of this essay I want to read is just a moment of me acknowledging the power of this healing creature. I actually heard it before I saw it. It wasn't the fireweed making noise, however, it was the bees. As I picked up my pace again, the buzzing got louder. When I finally crested the horizon line below the meadow, I came into a field of flowers larger and denser than any I have ever seen. I stopped running and just stood there, feeling myself be swallowed by pink. The fireweed was over 5 feet tall and growing with such enthusiasm that it nearly obscured the trail. To move forward, I had to push stalks to my side like a jungle bushwhacker. But I had to do it cautiously, as there was a bee on almost every one of those stalks. The insects looked fat and heavy, and I was surprised that they could fly at all. Between their pulsating hums and sluggish flights, I took them to be drunk on fireweed pollen. And they weren't the only creatures around. Within the span of a few paces, I managed to count 8 frenzied hummingbirds, and I knew there were snakes, voles, and ground squirrels below me, red-tailed hawks, ravens, and Clark's nutcrackers above me, and copious quantities of oxygen and pollen being produced all around me. This community was thriving. It occurred to me that it was thriving because of the sheer number of plants that were packed in together, the sheer number of plants doing the same thing with the same objective. I would not have embarked upon a 2.5-hour run to see one fireweed plant. I ventured up to that patch to see thousands, maybe tens of thousands of individuals working together. It takes that many stalks of fireweed to make a thriving community. It takes that many stalks of fireweed to heal a damaged burn site. It will take that many humans to heal a damaged planet. Thank you.
No, you get back over there. We'd love to open it up to your questions. And after this, we will have a book signing starting right around 4 o'clock, right inside the Great Hall. So just outside these doors, so you can make sure to grab your own copy of the book, start putting your own lovely notes inside it. But this is a good time. If we have a couple of burning questions out there, feel free to ask them while we're standing here.
Yeah.
Also, you can go ahead without the microphone.
So when you were talking about the kelp,
Great. So the question was about what's the benefit of kelp stretching? So kelp is a little bit like the forest of the temperate ocean. And as such, so it has what's called a holdfast that sticks it to the bottom of the ocean. And then it has pneumatocysts, which are those little air-filled sacs that sit up at the top. So it's stretching sometimes 60 feet deep. If you've ever gone scuba diving in the Monterey Bay, you get to swim around these creatures and you can see the stalks of it going, you're like swimming through towers of it. So if you can imagine, there's also occasionally 20 and 30-foot swell in the Monterey Bay, right? That's why we have incredible surfing. And so if you imagine these huge swells coming in, and here's this creature that's got its feet, in some sense, down on the ground, and its fingertips 60 feet in the air on the top of the surface of the water, it's got to be able to stretch in order to survive all of that swell. And then in doing so, because we want it to stay there, because as it stays there, it provides a home for an incredible amount of creatures. It provides, when it decays, it contributes nutrients back to the web of creatures that live there. It provides shore break to try to temper some of that swell, so the intertidal creatures benefit from it. So the fact that it can stretch ends up having all these downstream effects on other creatures that help them to live in that really challenging ecosystem where things are on the move at all times. Yeah, good question. Miguel.
With 8 arm brains and then 1 central brain, phenomenally well coordinated. What are humans learning from that coordination? It seems like when we have 8 nearly that well. Are there things that we might be able to draw from that to make our lives better?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the number one thing that we can and should draw from that is that there are other forms of intelligence out there besides the human version. Octopuses only live for 2 years. If you saw that movie, the My Octopus Teacher movie, which is fabulous, and it part of the sadness of it is the octopus with whom the the main narrator has a relationship, dies after 2 years, because that's what happens. They lay their eggs and then they die. And the guy becomes super sad as a result. But in order to get that level of intelligence in 2 years, arguably our species doesn't do that in 18 or 21, and they're coming to they're fully intelligent and capable of living in their very complex ecosystem quite quickly, and then they die after 2 years. So for starters, it's evolved completely differently on a very different time scale. And then we've got this complex thing of it's partly centralized but partly distributed. How does that work? We don't quite know how it works yet. And so all these studies that are doing things like, okay, if this arm touches a chemical over here and learns that that's a problematic chemical and retracts, does this arm 2 minutes later do the same thing or not? And one of the studies that I read suggests that, yes, that arm does learn from the other one. So, okay, so how did that message get communicated? Did it go through a central processing unit, or did it go from arm to arm? But then at the same time, there's arms that are kind of appear to be doing their own thing independently. So they're not going through the centralized processing unit. So the best answer I can give you is we're just sort of touching the tip of the iceberg about how this very different forms of intelligence operates. And I think what's helping us start to study this more is the fact that finally we seem to have gotten to a point of actually recognizing that this is a very intelligent creature, and not just saying this is something that should be on our plates, which appalls me. Here's this creature can get its way out of any cage, any time, unbelievable problem solving abilities. So now that we're coming to respect that, I think we're studying it more, and I think we're about to learn a bunch more about how this decentralized intelligence works, and then we undoubtedly could stand to learn a lot from that, both in our social structures, but also in things like networking, like how do networks, how does that apply to computers, for example?
Real quick, just another push for my survey up here. Please pull out your phone, scan that QR code, start filling it out where we're listening to these wonderful conversations and amazing questions. Back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's not so much there are some that didn't make the cut because I just didn't think they were good enough, but I'm constantly writing more, right? So recently I've become obsessed with this creature called Velella velella. That's its scientific name. Its common name is by-the-wind sailor. So if you live in the Monterey Bay area, which some of you do, you know this creature. It washes up on shore every spring in like the millions. So it's related to the man-o-war jellyfish. It's like, and I shouldn't say it, but it's harder for me to sex we don't have a pronoun, right? It was hard for me to sex a jellyfish-related creature. So I'm going to say it, knowing that I have issues with that. There's a disc about this size, and then it has a cellophane-looking, like saran wrap-looking sail that sits atop it, and little tentacles, short ones, that drip down. And those tentacles are hydroids, and they feed off of protozoans, bacteria in the water. And then this little sail structure does what you would think. It is there for the prevailing wind, and it gets blown around. These creatures have no way of steering themselves, so they go where the wind takes them. And that can be for weeks at a time in the ocean, but at a certain point, the prevailing winds along the California coast are so strong in the spring that they typically end up all washed up on shore. And there are just piles and piles of them on the tide line. And the blue part with the tentacles tends to get eaten really quickly by birds. So sometimes you just see these cellophane sail bits all over the shore. And I'm completely fascinated by them. I'm completely fascinated by the human story that's embedded in there, which is how much control do we have over where we go? Are we just sort of blown around as well? But we think we have more agency than, say, a Velella velella does, but perhaps we don't. So I'm working on an essay about that. So. Yeah, Velella velella, check it out. Great question. Thank you for asking. Patrice. Oh, sure. Yeah. So the book has a website, and it links to my personal. I make my living as an editor of other people's books, and so I have a link to the book website is my work website, and on there is a contact page. You're fully welcome to reach out to me there. I will have, at the signing table, I'll have some business cards out, I'll have some bookmarks out, I'll have a little postcard out about kind of other places where I'm doing this book tour, and you can reach out to me. There's plenty of information on all those sources about how to reach out to me, and you can follow me. I have an Instagram feed where I mostly post pictures of cool creatures, and I posted one of ghost plant today, which you all have quite a bit of. So I ran around on Bluff Island in Tupper Lake this morning and saw a lot of ghost plant, which is a parasitic plant that lives off of the mycelia in the soil. And so, that's my post today. So if you feel like following me on Instagram, you'll learn about a bunch of random creatures like Villela and ghost plant, Facebook connection, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, and definitely talk to me at the table, and I'll make sure you get all of that material. Thanks, Patrice.